Live broadcast video game streaming has become a household recognized phrase, being known internationally and has honestly never been more accessible. Being able to share your video game experience live with anyone across the globe by simply pressing a button. This concept wasn't always so accessible though. In fact, in my day, we had to wake up at 8 a.m. on weekends to be able to watch an episode of Nick Arcade or Starcade TV to see anything video game related. Now you gotta remember, this is before the internet became available to the public, so all we had were magazines like GamePro and Nintendo Power to see video game related news. So we all must acknowledge those that helped innovate the community and get us to where we are now. Now the subject of today's video was definitely a pioneer and innovator in his own right, with regards to bringing the public video game let's plays, tips and tricks, and just overall video game entertainment and reviews with the assistance of public access television. And so we'll be discussing JJ Styles, aka Zot The Avenger, what recently people have been considering the original streamer.
Evil Pixel.
Now before I continue, I want to say that I've been reaching out to JJ Styles over the past few months with no response, and he is very much active on social media. And it wasn't until I started writing this piece on him that I figured out why. Now, Mr. JJ Styles did do an interview once with PCGamer.com, so I'll be using the information gathered from his interview as well as his YouTube channel, which he still uploads videos on. Now during his interview with PC Gamer writer Alexis Ong, JJ wanted to speak with him first and ask the interviewer a few questions of his own, just to get to know the interviewer and see where he was from and get a feel for him. So it kinda goes without saying that JJ Styles is a bit protective of his privacy and he's very conditional about speaking with people. And of course it's his right to do so. So it all started to make sense as to why he hasn't been responding to any of my inquiries. And again, it's all 100% understandable. Now our story begins in Tucson, Arizona. The year is 1993. The same year that saw legendary video game releases such as The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, Secret of Mana, Star Fox, Street Fighter II, and Mortal Kombat, just to name a few. The video game craze was at its peak and the bit wars were raging on. Now a savvy 12-year-old by the name of JJ Styles appeared to create something that he had wished to see on television. A live show dedicated to video games. JJ was introduced to the world of broadcasting through his mother's ventures of finding her biological parents. At the time, public access TV was assisting these support groups to get the word out on individuals looking for their families. Now because of this, JJ would hang around at the local studio of Tucson known as Tucson Community Cable Corporation. Now, public access television is a bit of a forgotten media type that isn't well known anymore. So allow me to explain. Public access television, in short, offers free speech with regards to televised programming and gives local communities the opportunity to produce their own shows. Now, during the early 2000s, public access became a bit of a meme in itself, as a lot of these individuals were harassed and terrorized by numerous prank callers. The rise of social media definitely assisted with these acts. But the story of JJ Styles is a good example of how public access can provide opportunities to locals who don't necessarily have the resources to produce their own shows on their own budget. But I digress. Now, while JJ hung out at the TV station, he also took classes on operating the equipment and eventually got certified on it at only 10 years old. Now, one of the first productions JJ recalls working on is The Forbidden Zone, which was a public access production about music. Now, after a little over a year of working on other people's projects at the local TV station, JJ dedicated to adapt his love for Wayne's World and video games into a real show. He did have one advantage of living in Tucson area though, and that is that AZ StarNet, a local Arizona internet service provider, was providing unlimited internet in the area, which was a huge deal back in the day. Now remember that internet was still very young and companies were just expanding to the World Wide Web. JJ also learned how to use an Amiga 2000 and shortly after created the logo that would be Zot The Avengers used on air. He would name his show Videogames and More. Now JJ prepared himself with all the information he needed to keep his viewers watching. He did this by subscribing to a good amount of video game magazines such as GamePro, Electronic Gaming Monthly, Nintendo Power, and Sega Vision. So he would gather and archive all the upcoming video game news he could, along with cheat codes, guides, press releases, and other related topics. Now while he was taking classes at the station, JJ also took it upon himself to learn HTML and utilize this knowledge to create his own website. He would then use his website as a reference for all of his archived video game news and topics for use in his show and for his viewers. And so began his journey to start his broadcast. Now, the first two shows were not actually filmed at the TV station, but rather a cafe across the street. The cafe apparently had a live feed for people to use, and so he did. Now, JJ's main focus was to be able to play with friends and trash talk like you would in real life. He refers to the first two shows as a prequel of what the show was meant to be. With help from a very small camera crew, his co-host Jason Kingman, some video game consoles, and the green screen, Videogames and More was live. JJ Styles assisted several people with their projects at the local station. Such was the case with his friend Jason Kingman. JJ helped his buddy Jason with his project, and in return, he asked Jason to help him with his Videogames and More broadcast. What he wanted to do at the start was very simple. Simply play games with his friends and trash talk as stated previously. And so his first two episodes consisted of him and his friend playing NHL 93 for the Sega Genesis and Mortal Kombat, all while providing tips and tricks, cheat codes, and video game news to the viewers and callers. Now, according to JJ Styles, his perspective as not only a kid during these times, but also an avid gamer, was what was going to popularize him with viewers and give them what new young gamers wanted to know. He brought a young gamer's mentality to the criticisms and reviews he was providing. An example he gave PC Gamer during an interview was an interaction he had with the caller of his show where JJ stated that the Game Boy sucks as a console. Now the reason why he came to that conclusion was due to the fact that he couldn't play the Game Boy at night without a battery-powered light. And this was a legitimate complaint about the Game Boy that JJ immediately recognized and told others about. Again, emphasizing his review of a product as a young gamer, not a salesman or a paid ad rep trying to sell things to consumers. JJ stated, quote, "That was disappointing because, kids, they got no money, you know? How am I gonna come up with batteries all the time?" End quote. A very valid point. Other ways that JJ Styles was able to push through his dreams of making his live broadcast was cutting on his costs to be able to continue his show. One way he was able to cut on costs was using a soldering iron to make a VHS tape into an SVHS tape, which had a higher resolution. Now once he had enough SVHS tapes to make his own personal copies, he applied to have his show on reruns at the local TV station. Now of course, similar to how things are now, there have been and probably forever will be trolls. And that is to say that Videogames and More did have their fair share of troll callers. As a young JJ Styles and his co-hosts were presenting codes or gameplay footage, callers would oftentimes call in and say pretty mean things to JJ and his co-hosts, such as, "Why are you doing this? Your show sucks," and other non-favorable words that I'd rather not say on air. But I have to give it to JJ and his crew for keeping their cool the entire time and not reacting negatively towards the trolls. In fact, I actually felt bad looking back at these videos of a young 12-year-old receiving this type of backlash for simply doing what he loves. Now, this is of course the equivalent of chat trolls on Twitch or other inappropriate behavior from viewers that we see far too often nowadays in streaming. Now, a very cool feature that JJ and his team implemented during the broadcast was a live face cam on a few of his playthroughs. While this certainly is extremely common by today's standards, since almost every popular streamer uses a face cam to interact with their audience, back in the early 90s this was very impressive and wasn't seen utilized very often. Again, emphasizing the vision and innovation that JJ Styles had with his broadcast. Video Games and More went on to broadcast 37 episodes consisting of a range of content as stated previously, which consisted of Let's Plays from series such as Vectorman, Super Mario 64, and Shadowrun. He did tips and tricks requests to even showing viewers how to browse the internet for video game content. And on one occasion, he took to the streets with a microphone to get public reactions of attraction rides and showed behind the scenes of his production. Now, although I'm not exactly sure if this was actually aired, but he does have it uploaded on his YouTube channel. I'll leave a link in the description below. Now, unfortunately, all good things sometimes come to an end. Video Games and More with host Zot The Avenger came to an end in 1997. Now, JJ Styles decided to focus on his studies of computer programming as well as focus on his other passion, which was music. More specifically, the bass guitar. Now currently, he actually is a music producer, even though he admits to not being up to date with streaming and who the big names of streaming are. Now it's also important to note that JJ is also working with the Internet Archive to preserve all the episodes of Video Games and More. Now I think this is super important as not every episode of his show is available on YouTube. Now he does have a Twitch and is pretty active on social media such as X or Twitter, and does upload somewhat frequently on his YouTube channel. Now I guess I should also mention that I was able to gather a good amount of information used in this video from his own YouTube channel, where JJ often goes on long discussions speaking about things going on in his life, and talks about his passions and his past very often. With streaming becoming more and more accessible now than ever before, I think it's important to pay homage and respect when it's due. Oftentimes, it's people's dedication and hard work that gets the ball rolling for change and bigger movements altogether. Growing up in the 80s, I've been lucky enough to witness technology evolve in such a way that I've grown to appreciate all of the small stepping stones that were taken to get to where we are today. I lived through the era of buying video games blindly and praying that it wouldn't be a terrible game. We didn't have reviews or YouTube channels or Let's Plays to give us suggestions of a particular game. But we definitely appreciated those that thought outside the box to provide over-the-top content for kids in the early 90s. So to that I say, thank you JJ Styles, aka Zot The Avenger, and his production team for paving the way and perhaps being some type of inspiration to a local viewer. And of course, thank you all for watching and supporting our content. If you enjoyed this video, check out some of our other videos in our playlist including unreleased games, gaming betas, rare consoles, and other things involving very obscure video game topics. Check us out on Twitch or Discord to discuss any other unreleased gaming topics. And I'll catch you all next time.